A different perspective is from Andrew Wilson.
The death at Manus Island was a tragedy. People are obviously desperate when they've paid thousands of dollars to people smugglers and have no hope of coming here. Yet why did the ABC show no similar outrage for the thousands of deaths caused by the dismantling of the Pacific Solution?
I'll go to Ken Roth on this, and this is the justification for stopping the boats, that thousands of people died at sea. Before I'll just quickly take issue with your point there, because I reject the characterisation of the ABC's role in this. In fact, some of the most graphic reporting on this was done by ABC reporters, including finding ships that nobody even knew had been lost at sea, and finding the detail of those. So I just discount what you're saying.
I take issue with that. You never once opposed the previous government's policy in my reading of the ABC.
OK, all right, Ken Roth.
All right. Well, first, if I could just let me address the 100 days without a boat, because the question really is, how did that happen? If I said we're going to execute everybody who shows up in a boat, the boats would stop. Is that a fair way to do it? No. You've got to do it in a way that respects human rights, and sending people off to Manus Island or Nauru, given the conditions there, is not a way that respects human rights. Now, in terms of the
it's not. To be fair, that's a pretty extreme analogy.
No, I'm not saying they're the same.
People who are being sent back are not being threatened at gunpoint. I mean, they are being put on lifeboats and...
Well, we don't know. The ones who are being sent back, I mean, you got to understand, these are people who are, Tamils fleeing Sri Lanka. These are Hazara fleeing Afghanistan. These are people who are facing life-threatening situations at home. So turning them around and just pushing them back is effectively sending them back to their executioners sometimes, not always, but there's a real risk. The fact that they pay a smuggler to get them here is a sign of their desperation. It is not a sign of their wealth. It is a sign that they've got to get out of there. So let's be real about what's going on here. Now, in terms of the humanitarian costs of the boats, I agree. We should try to stop people from risking their lives. The answer to that is to set up centers, whether it's in Malaysia or Indonesia or Pakistan or wherever, places where, in much more significant numbers than is possible now, people can apply for asylum. And they wouldn't have to risk the boat journey. The only reason they're risking their lives is because there's no alternative. The countries around here don't recognize refugee rights. None of them have ratified the Refugee Convention. That's why they come to Australia. This is the first place in the region that does recognize those rights in principle, but it's not respecting them now.
But part of the challenge...
So what would our intake have to be, do you think, to stop people from fleeing from Afghanistan and the Hazara and so forth?
Well, look at
At what point do you believe, because you've said we set up the centres, and if I thought that worked, I would be in favour of it. But there will always be some who won't make the quota. So do you think that they will then not take their lives in their hands and their children's lives in their hands to get a better life?
Well, at
what
this
sort
point,
of people do you think?
Let me answer. Yeah, at this point, Australia is nowhere near bearing its burden. The latest number was 20. The latest number was 20,000 asylum seekers who arrived by boat. I think it was in 2013. That, if my calculations are correct, is roughly 1/10% of Australia's population. I mean, that's a rounding error in a census. Let's compare that with Lebanon. Lebanon, a population of 5 million, has taken in 1 million Syrian refugees with 1/7 the GDP per capita of Australia. I mean, Australia is pretending as if, the sky is falling because 20,000 people arrive by boat. Let's look what a real disaster is looking like. But Australia is nowhere near bearing the burden of
Lebanon. If you feel like that, why don't you just put all your money into the UN refugee program?
Well, I very much support the UN refugee program.
But all your money.
The issue is not, the question is right now, is Australia a wealthy country doing its share by having taken in 20,000 asylum seekers? No, it is nowhere close.
We can take a lot. Immigration's been great for the country, and we can take a lot more immigrants, but you can't take people to put them onto the dole. So we can't run the same sort of welfare programs we have today to have the same immigration program.
What is the assumption here, that because somebody seeks asylum, they go on the dole?
No.
I mean, please, just to put this in perspective, my father was an asylum seeker.
Yeah.
Okay? He fled Nazi Germany. He went to New York. Do you think he was ever, for 1 minute of his life, on the dole? And I think that is the norm for asylum seekers.
And can I tell you, Carl? Can I tell you that there are some great people in Western Sydney, refugees from African countries, etc., who I don't believe get anywhere near the amount of social services that they deserve, and that the money we spend on social workers today we will save on prison warders tomorrow, and to think that you can gloss over the problems and not look after the people when you've got them here, I think is the way you characterise that, I thought was ridiculous.
Okay, let's go to some other panellists. Tim Wilson, you were trying to get, I think you were at least going to make an attempt to defend the government's position.
Well, that's representing my view. What my view is that there is no easy solutions to this problem. This is part of the challenge. And I take the gentleman's point, I take Ken's point. The challenge we have as a country is that we have a certain number of people we've allocated. We may very well be able to increase it, but still there is the issue of the quota. And part of the challenge we have with people in detention is that while we're processing those people, we're also turning a blind eye to refugee camps. Because I actually agree, and this comes to the heart of the problem for many people. There are people who are legitimately in refugee camps in places like Lebanon. It's entirely legitimate they seek asylum because of the horrible circumstances they're surrounded because of a consequence of Syria, etc. And it's that tension between legitimately coming here through that process and seeking to come here via boat and trying to escape horrific conditions as well. And we can't just look at one as the mere solution rather than looking at the broader context.
All right, our original questioner wanted to get back in. I'll just go back to her. And Ilwad, listening to this, what are your thoughts?
I think that Australia is taking a lot of very horrific positions and putting itself in very difficult situations. They're cuddling up with Sri Lanka, cutting off the boats and celebrating that they have had 100 days of no boats coming in. Talking about how Australians should be bigots. I mean, this whole environment, some of the topics that we discussed here today, it's just showing a whole new Australia that I never really thought about before. And I think a lot of people are going to be shocked by this new position and this movement. It seems that it's a very exclusive environment and that it's not taking on its weight. And many people look to Australia as a very privileged, developed nation that can carry more weight. And it's a very...
I agree. It's sounding pretty toxic.
Yeah.
Let's just hear from our original questioner.
Thanks, Tony. Tim, in your response, you mentioned that the Australian Human Rights Commission does not have access to Manus or Nauru. Do you think that that point is of concern, and what is the Commission doing to kind of rectify that situation?
Well, we can't do anything to rectify it. It's up to the government. But both the current government and the previous government denied the Australian Human Rights Commission access to the detention centres, and my view on this is quite clear, which is if these detention centres are set up for Australia, for processing, we're paying for them, we have at least an ethical and moral responsibility for some of the things that go on in there. We should have the capacity, as should the media, to reasonable access. That doesn't mean unfettered access, but we should certainly be able to look in and see what's happening to make sure that it's meeting what we accept as a country.
OK, Lucy, you said you thought it was sounding like the atmosphere was toxic. What do you mean by that?
Just as Ilwad said, some of the positions that the Australian government is taking on behalf of the nation, they sound pretty toxic to outsiders. But I just wanted to talk about this challenge, as we might call it, is that it's going to get worse. If you saw the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issuing today, the 300 scientists who've come to the consensus on what's happening with climate change, it is not good news. And one of the things that it will mean is that more and more people will have to migrate. So we are looking at increasingly large numbers of people who need somewhere else to be, need somewhere else to live for environmental reasons. And that's something that we need to not be in this state, because we need to be planning for the future when it's only going to get worse.
And I'll give the final word to Mona.
I think sometimes it helps in these discussions to get really down to the bare bones and just say it as it is. And that is, people are scared of brown and black people coming into your country. And that's essentially what it is. And once you take it down to the bare bones, when you talk about things like the dole, and they're coming to take our jobs, they're coming to take our money, and all these incredibly, as you said, Lucy, toxic ideas that people have, it is at the end of the day about racism. It's about people who don't look like us. But in a country like this, you have to ask, who is us? And who made us us? And what did you do to the people who were there before us became us? And are you okay with that?
Thank you. I'm sorry, that's all people have their hands up. I'm sorry, that's all we have time for. We really, I think we're probably just about out of time.